Everyone, Martin Hamilton, Lead Civic Trust Director. We're just going to give people 30 seconds to join the call before we make a proper start. Welcome everyone. Hope you've cooled down since after the last couple of days of intense heat. Certainly where we are in the centre of Leeds, this building is still very hot because it's an old building that retains the heat. So there's a delay of about a day where you're actually quite good on the day that it's hot, and then the next day the heat sort of comes in. So yeah, it's still rather warm. So yeah, just give a couple more seconds and then we'll make a start. So I know we've got about 60 people signed up today. We will people often join, a few minutes after we've started, so we'll allow them to start, but we've got quite a lot to get through today. So I think we will make a start now. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this this fourth RRR, which is hard to say, webinar. And we've had some really good discussions so far, and I think today is going to be no exception to that. So today's webinar is entitled The Residential Realm, and we've got 4 speakers lined up. We've got Andy Boyce from Uptake Energy, we've got Rob Curtis from Leeds City Council, Jonathan Atkinson from the Retrofit Co-op, and then Steve Hoey from People Powered Homes. So each are going to speak for about 15 minutes. Please use the chat function to chip in whenever you like. But if we have time at the end, we will take some questions and have a bit of discussion. Claude joins us today as always. Claude was the mastermind behind this series of webinars, and I know she'll be chipping in as the webinar progresses. So I think we'll make a start, Andy, if that's okay. So I've enabled the share function, so you should be able to put your slides on the screen.
Oh, it seems to be frozen.
Oh dear. Just give Andy, see if Andy, are you able to join us, do you think? No? Oh, here we go. Hi Andy, are you? It's just coming through now. I think just give it a see if you can get the internet to work. I know you've got a bit of a problem at your end. I think you're okay, Andy.
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
It never plays up, so typical that it's playing up now, but yeah. Hopefully it'll be okay.
Okay, thanks.
Are you wanting me? Sorry, I missed the.
Yeah, so if you want to kick off, Andy, if you've got any slides you want to share, then that would be great.
Brilliant. Right, I'm just sharing screen now. Hopefully you can see this slide. First slide.
Yeah, that looks good.
So I'm going to talk about the work of the Better Homes Hub, which is this vision of delivering better homes, better neighbourhoods, and better lives for the region. So I'm Andy Boyle. I'm a director of Uptake Energy, and we are a community energy company, but we've spent most of the last couple of years working on this project with Leeds City Council, West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and a cast of thousands, really. So the proposals that I'll talk through have been developed currently as part of the Mayor's Climate and Environment Plan. So Tracy Braben has allocated £40 million to support the ambitious Climate and Environment Plan. But the plans have been developed over a couple of years with national and regional partners. A key focus working with the UK Green Buildings Council, and a real coming together of the regions. So we're working with the likes of Greater London, West Midlands, Greater Manchester, all of the regions coming together to really figure out how we tackle retrofit at the scale that we need. And a really important part of the approach that we're taking in West Yorkshire is working with the West Yorkshire Housing Partnership, which includes Leeds City Council, and between them have 175,000 social homes. I've just got someone at my door. I'm really sorry. I'll be back in 30 seconds. You couldn't make it up. So yeah, really important element of it that we're working with the social housing sector, and that really important foundation of tangible homes that we're talking about. Just catch my breath. So we're talking about a joined up approach, which is really about understanding, and everyone on the call will understand the various barriers to retrofit. So at the heart of it, there's just a lack of a compelling offer, really. The community, excuse me, the community, homeowners, it's just not on their agenda, really, to retrofit their homes. More recently, with the cost of living crisis, it's moving up the agenda. I think people are starting to understand the importance of it in the context of climate change. But I think people have their own priorities. So that lack of demand means that even those who do want to retrofit the homes can't find a supply chain. And there's a lack of a skills sector because there's a lack of demand for skills. And fundamentally, we're talking about a lack of a financial offer, really. There's just that there isn't those compelling funding mechanisms. And part of the problem with that is a lack of ambitious government policy. But that lack of ambitious policy is compounded by the fact that there isn't that voter mandate because it's not on people's agendas. It's not the sort of thing that the government can just come in and mandate on. So what we're trying to do with the West Yorkshire Housing Partnership is create a one-stop shop model which will support all homeowners to overcome these barriers as we transition to prosperous net zero and sustainable communities. So fundamental to it is this partnership approach. So West Yorkshire working with each of the local authorities, working with the social housing sector, working with people like Steve and the community housing sector, and really importantly, bringing the community into the process, working with the third sector and also the business community. And it's fundamentally about this suite of services. So how do we walk all homeowners, whether they're social landlords, private landlords, private homeowners, walking through that process of understanding the benefits to them, but understanding what work needs to be done and how they procure those services, and really importantly, how they fund those services. So we're talking about a whole house approach, which is really recognizing that fundamentally we're talking about changing the source of the energy for homes, particularly around low carbon heating, but understanding the work that we need to do to get homes to be ready for those low carbon sources. So what are we going to do from a fabric perspective in terms of insulation? How can we improve people's comfort and particularly tackle fuel poverty as we face this cost of living crisis? But then also, how does the work that we're doing in our homes impact and interact with the rest of the energy system? Because as we switch to low carbon heating, electric heating probably, and electric vehicles, that's massive capacity requirements for the grid. So what are we going to do as homeowners and communities around time of use tariffs to ease some of that pressure on the grid? And the fundamental principle of what we're trying to do with the Better Homes Hub, and this is building on success of Leeds, which has really pioneered the idea of area-based approaches in places like Holbeck and Beeston. So how are we going to do this street by street? How are we going to engage communities in the process? And come at it from a regeneration perspective. So understanding that actually we are talking about much better homes for people, much better standards of living, but also we can have transformational impacts on whole communities in the way that Leeds have achieved. And the next stage on from that, and the logical progression really in terms of tackling the whole of the net zero challenge, but also tackling all of the other social challenges that we face, is how do we go beyond just retrofit and low levels of regeneration into this more fundamental shift within our communities. And lots of the regions are developing and releasing demonstrator projects around this idea of a net zero neighbourhood. So going into communities, understanding what their priorities are, and tackling them all in a joined up way that can join up budgets, join up working practices, join up different stakeholders to work together on these projects. And I'll leave it at that. And apologies for all of the disruption.
Not to worry. That was a really good introduction to this topic. I guess the question I would ask, just a general question, is: are there examples of where this approach has already happened elsewhere in the country, elsewhere in the world? You know, is there other sort of tried and tested things that we're almost taking on board, or is this kind of the approach that you describe one that is bespoke to to this area?
Yeah, it's a mixture of those two things. I'd say the approach is based on a huge amount of research about existing schemes and emerging schemes. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about has an element of innovation with it. These are projects that are being developed across the country, across the world, and we don't know exactly the impact and how successful they're going to be. But all of the things, all of the component parts within the proposals for the hub exist either as mature approaches or emerging approaches. I'd say the innovation in the approach that we're taking is the stitching of them together, trying to do it in this joined up way, trying to take, as people call it, a whole systems approach, understanding that you've got to tackle the whole system and all of those different elements. So yeah, loads of great case studies, loads of great collaboration at the heart of the developments, but I wouldn't pretend that this is an established model and we know that it's going to succeed. But it's based on, as I said, it's based on like the successes of Leeds in Holbeck and Beeston, and that sort of that foundation of knowledge. Yeah.
Thanks, Andy. Anyone else want to got any points they want to make before we move on? Claude, anything you want to say?
Just to say, last week at the very end, we got an introduction to the whole house approach, and the SCBA, who are behind this, weren't able to join us for the series. But it's very easy to find information about this. Just type in whole house approach. And the fundamental principle is that you look at the house, what you have, prioritize certain interventions over other interventions, and try to understand what kind of energy efficiency your house has, because the type of house, whether it was built in the 1850s or the 1950s, will be very different depending on different people.
Thanks, Claude.
Yeah, I'd say I was just going to say that I think it's really important to make the distinction between, as Claude's saying, that it's not about doing the whole house in one go. It's about understanding what the finished product needs to and can look like, and then coming up with comfortable phases for people to go through over a number of years. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks to Andy. I know you've got to go shortly, so you've probably got to carry on listening for a little while, but That was really, really good. So really appreciate that. And I think Rob is going to go next. Rob Curtis from Leeds City Council. Rob, over to you.
Hi, yes, thanks, Martin. I'll just share the screen, won't be a moment. Just put the presentation. Right, that should be working, hopefully, fingers crossed. Our systems are a bit slow. Just to sort of introduce myself, I work for Leeds City Council for the Sustainable Energy and Air Quality team. And basically we sort of work with our sort of partners, including sort of Housing Leeds, who obviously are sort of the basic housing arm, who sort of run our council sort of properties estate. So I'll give, first of all, a bit of an overview of our sort of our approach generally, particularly the sort of area-based approach, and also talk about a couple of schemes as well. And annoyingly, it's opened it up incorrectly, so yes, so whilst that's thinking about it, essentially, obviously at Leeds, we've got a long-term commitment to achieving net zero by 2030, a long-term commitment to reducing carbon emissions, and that sort of culminated in the target of net zero by 2030. We also have a commitment to reduce fuel poverty, which is essentially which is based, part of the aspect is improving the energy efficiency of the whole housing stock. So that's cross-tenure, although obviously as a fairly large landlord, we're quite heavily invested in sort of social housing as well, obviously. Why? I'll sort of go on to the next slide. So essentially, our aim is to develop sort of cross-tenure schemes. Basically, if you think of a sort of traditional council housing estate, there's no such thing really. Right to buy essentially means that all of our sort of traditional estates are mixed tenure. So if you want to sort of improve the area, you have to sort of try and find ways of looking at the different sort of tenures essentially. And that can be a challenge because obviously sort of different sort of funding streams are available for sort of different sort of tenures. But one of the things that we've tried to do in the past, and we still try to do, is to sort of combine those so that we can have an offer to as many different sort of parts of the area as possible, essentially. So why go for an area-based approach? Well, certainly you get efficiencies in marketing and delivery. So when you're looking at things for sort of sites to sort of store works and to set up compounds, so that basically sort of the workers on the scheme have somewhere to go. It's a lot easier to do that on an area based. And also, as I mentioned, we want to provide a tangible benefit to the whole area. So you can improve sort of generally a whole area rather than sort of individual properties. And the other sort of benefit of the area based approach is that we can sort of basically try and tackle what I call left behind property types. So obviously in the past, there's been a lot of sort of emphasis on improving cavity wall and loft insulation, which are the sort of quick wins. But essentially sort of, you've got things that there are sort of certain types of properties that tend to be sort of clustered, which have not been sort of, have been more expensive and difficult to improve. And I go into a bit more detail of those sort of later on. So basically over the years, we've had various successful projects. We've had projects for loft insulation and cavity wall insulation in the past, for both council and private homes. We've been undertaking sort of improvements under the Decent Home Standard for council homes over many years. And that's actually resulted in sort of the overall profile of our council homes being more energy efficient than other tenures, although there's obviously quite a lot more to do still, as we're showing. And also we've been sort of replacing obsolete heating, such as electric storage heating that's difficult to control and expensive to run. In the past, that's been with gas central heating, but obviously with the net zero carbon sort of target, that's sort of changing to sort of low carbon heating as well. And sort of we've had things like our Lincoln Green District Heating project, which has looked at a large number of sort of flats in the east of the city that are actually heated from the energy from waste plant. So the sort of properties that are left behind, particularly but not exclusively in the council estate, are essentially high-rise blocks. They tend to require sort of external wall insulation, and traditionally they're not suitable, or they've not been suitable for gas central heating. So they've tended to be left with obviously things like obsolete storage heaters mainly. Also, we've got a lot of system-built properties which fit with things like steel frames, sort of concrete panels and things of that sort. And they've tended to require expensive sort of bespoke insulation as well. And finally, we do actually have across Leeds a large number of Victorian solid wall properties which require external wall insulation and very often attic room insulation. And whilst it's not what you would think of as traditionally as a council house, we do actually have quite a few of those as within our portfolio of council properties. So it's in our interest both for the sort of regeneration sort of purpose, but also in improving our own housing stock to have actual schemes that tackle those as well. So I go on to sort of some of our projects that are underway currently. So the Holtdales estate, it's a scheme to improve 190 low-rise flats in the Holtdales area of Leeds. They've traditionally had sort of expensive to heat storage heaters with sort of limited insulation. The works that we're currently undertaking are involving external wall insulation, improved loft insulation, new doors and glazing to improve the actual fabric of the property. But we're also installing air source heat pumps and solar PV to help to decarbonise. And the scheme's actually costing around £8.87 million. So the benefits that we're hoping to get for this are to sort of reduce average energy bills by around 70% and improve sort of SAT ratings to around C or above. And we're also looking to get a demand in energy reduction of between 30 and 50 kilowatt hours per metre squared. So these are mainly council homes with around a quarter of private leaseholders. So essentially there's a mix of funding to achieve this. Obviously Housing Leeds has its own funding from sort of rents that are paid in, but we've also sort of applied to the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund from central government, which is going to improve sort of the council properties. And also as a council, we bid for some of the government's Green Homes Grant Local Authority Delivery Scheme funding, which is covering a fairly wide sort of number of sort of projects across the city. But we're using that to provide an offer to the leaseholders who are effectively sort of owner occupiers and sort of private landlords essentially in the scheme of things. So as you see, there's a picture of sort of the works going on above, and you can see it's got a sort of pebble dash effect that's looking a bit tired and stained. And then we've got a picture of the sort of finished project underneath, which shows the sort of new exterior, which looks a lot more modern, and it also shows some of the air source heat pump units that are attached. So I'll move on to another sort of project that we're doing. Basically, we're doing one of the sort of left behind sort of types of properties are sort of high-rise blocks that are across Leeds. So we've got quite a lot of these, and they've basically got sort of generally expensive electric heating. A lot of them used to be underfloor, but the council ones are mainly storage heaters. So we've got a scheme to bring district heating to around 26 high-rise blocks across the city, at an estimated cost of around £24 million. Obviously, they're not suitable for central heating, so they sort of tended to be left behind in that respect. The aim is to provide more controllable heating for householders, reduce bills by at least 10% per household, also to reduce the overall carbon emissions by approximately 950 tonnes per annum across all of the sort of properties, and to improve the SAP ratings to D or above. Basically, these 26 high-rise blocks are split into 6 district heating clusters. And the approach that we're taking is to look at the best low carbon sort of heating system for each of these different clusters on its own basis. So they're being done one after the other. Generally, the best sort of option is coming out as a sort of ground source heat pump system, where you have sort of shared boreholes providing the heat, and they go to individual sort of heat units within the building. And that's certainly the case for the third cluster that we're dealing with, which I'm going to sort of go into in a bit more detail. So the picture that you've got there is of the Poplars in Armley, which is our third cluster. And I'll just go on to my next slide. So it's around, well, it's 186 flats in four blocks. As I say, it came out that the ground source heat pump system would be the preferred one here. The cost for this is about 3.6 million, and the works are sort of commencing January this year and taking approximately 7 months. So we're hoping to get out of this estimated reduction in carbon emissions of around 218 tonnes per year, increase SAP ratings by 36 points on average, and to increase the renewable energy sort of production of between 0.8 and 1.2 megawatts. So the scheme, obviously, it's involved a lot of consultation and outreach with residents throughout the design of the project, and also private leaseholders have been given the opportunity to buy into it. So the infrastructure is generally put into the block, and then if you've got a private leaseholder who wants to buy in, and then they can sort of pay to have the sort of heating exchange installed in their property, essentially. I should say that these are all different types of blocks, so we're also looking at ways to insulate the external walls, but obviously sort of that comes under a separate project. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our last project, or my last project for this talk. It's slightly different, well, quite a bit different from the other two. It takes the sort of approach of area renewal. Andy spoke a little bit about it earlier. It's the Holbeck area renewable scheme, and it takes that sort of approach a bit more sort of in a bit more detail. Unlike the other properties, it does have some council properties in it, but it's more heavily private sector. As I say, they tend to be the older sort of terraced properties with solid walls, pre-1919 built, and often with attic rooms. And they tend to have a large proportion of private rented homes. And because they're sort of low income areas, the low rent yields from them have tended to mean in the past that there's been little incentive for sort of private landlords to actually improve the properties. So the scheme, we've been sort of taking this area renewal approach in Leeds for several years. It started off with an earlier project in the Richmond Hill area, and there was also a phase 1 project in Holbeck which improved 153 homes. But I'm going to talk in a bit more detail about phase 2, which is basically improving a further sort of 146 properties. The sort of physical improvements are external wall insulation, with re-roofing where necessary, and so obviously roofing insulation at that point, new windows and doors as well. So as part of the area approach, there are other works going on. So for example, there are wider sort of environmental improvements being made to the areas. So, for example, these areas tend to have bin yards, which have traditionally sort of attracted sort of rubbish and antisocial behaviour. So tidying up and gating those is one of the things that we're doing. Improvements to the sort of pavements and the roadways and any green spaces in the area. But also we've been sort of undertaking inspections in sort of some of the private rented properties to identify and remove safety hazards, tackling antisocial behaviour in the area such as fly tipping, and also bringing empty properties back into use. So the overall cost of this sort of phase of that project was around 4.5 million. It included funding from the Getting Building Fund and also sort of Green Homes Grant Local Authority Delivery Fund as well. And obviously for the council homes, Housing Leads put in some of their funding as well for that. Landlords have to pay a contribution to the works, and the expected benefits that we're getting from those are improved average SAP ratings from bands F and G to bands B and C, increased room temperatures from as low as 12 degrees centigrade to sort of 18 degrees centigrade, general reductions in fuel bills of around 25 to 30%. That was around 350 to 400 pounds per annum. I think that was before the sort of very large price rises started kicking in, but obviously it'll help to shield people from those price rises. And it also puts back around £75,000 into people's own sort of funds. So that's back into the community. You can see sort of a couple of photos there. There's an action shot of some of the works being done. And also there's a bit of a finished shot there as well. And if I sort of move to the next slide, you can see a before and after shot of one of the properties that was improved. Obviously on the left, it's looking quite sort of run down with a lot of work being needed. And as you can see on the right, it's been finished. It matches with the other properties, looks a lot tidier. And there's also obviously sort of kept in keeping with the traditional style of the property as well. I should say as part of that sort of project, we've also done a pilot of 2 properties, improving them to the new PAS 2035 standard, which is basically looking at the costs of that and the implications. So my last bit of the talk, the sort of challenges we face in this sort of approach. One of it's the overall scale of the problem. Obviously, just to give you an idea, around 30% of our properties are sort of pre-1919, so wouldn't have been suitable for sort of cavity wall or often traditional loft insulation. So that's just finding the funding going into the future to improve all of those properties that need improving is going to be sort of an issue. And also the perennial issue of sort of mixed tenure funding as well. So for example, we need to have funding for private sector properties, and council often comes from different pots. And also income types. A lot of the schemes, such as the local authority Green Homes Grant schemes, are based around income levels. So if you're limited with the grant funding for the income level, as Andy mentioned, you need to have an offer that's palatable for people who are on higher incomes than that as well. Another issue that we've got sort of coming up is the switch to low carbon. As a city, we're very reliant on gas. And if you do decide to sort of switch to things like heat pumps, often there's a lot of money to get a property suitable to be heated by a heat pump, for example, before you even put in the low carbon solution. So that's an issue that has to be addressed. And as I mentioned already, there are new standards coming in, such as the PAS 2035. It adds more sort of physical costs of works. So for example, in the example of the terrace properties, you have to dig down for external wall insulation to below the level of the ground, which obviously increases costs. And there also sort of needs to put in ventilation into properties, which people don't always want, frankly, and can act as a bit of a barrier. So those are all things that we're looking at. Yeah, that's the end of my talk. So hope you found it interesting.
Absolutely, that was really interesting, Rob. We have a question actually, which you may be able to answer, which is from Christophe Dumoulin. Christophe asks, says, aren't the blank gable facades of high-rise blocks not perfect for solar panel installations, especially if combined with insulating external walls, given that insulating external walls require specialist access anyway? So has that been looked at, actually putting solar panels on the facades of the tower blocks?
It might well have been. I must admit, I don't know personally. We have been sort of looking at we have been putting solar panels on properties. We did a scheme a couple of years ago, which put solar panels on 1,000 council homes, which were obviously, they were the sort of low-rise sort of individual homes and properties. I suspect it might be that because those properties are the easier to do, we've possibly done those earlier. And also it's easier because you can sort of link the panels to the supply for that individual property more easily. But it wouldn't surprise me if funding were available and there was a sort of a good sort of modus operandi for doing that, if there were sort of plans, or if there was the potential to sort of put that on some of the blank walls on tower blocks. I'm not aware of it being sort of something that we're actively looking at the moment, though.
With thanks for that, Rob. That's really helpful. With I'm just thinking about you talk about the challenges of mixed tenure, sort of, where you have mixed tenure, private and public, private rent payers, homeowners and council rent payers, if you like, those sort of three. And thinking about particularly about tower blocks, maybe as an example, where I know any improvements made to a tower block, let's say putting a new roof on, the private residents would be expected to pay towards that cost.
Yeah.
Is there a tipping point beyond which that becomes tricky? I mean, I assume that looking at the tower blocks, for example, the majority of are the majority of occupiers still renting from the council, or have any gone to a minority situation? And does that in itself create problems when you're looking at how you actually finance these things?
Yeah, as I say, generally, I mentioned that on your average council estate, about a third of properties were generally sort of private owned. For tower blocks, it's a lot less, but you do have leaseholders in them.
Yes.
I've been involved with a couple of schemes, and it has created sort of some issues. The schemes I've been involved with have been sort of the district heating schemes, where you're sort of putting the sort of improvement in the individual property. So what we've tended to do with that is to sort of put in the infrastructure, so if someone wants to sign up, they can, or if we can find the additional funding for it, then we can offer that to them. I'm not sure how it works for things like EWI. I suspect there's more sort of compulsion to sort of built into it because you're dealing with the fabric of the property.
Of course, yeah.
But yeah, I must admit it would probably be someone from Housing Leeds who would need to sort of answer that in a bit more detail as to what the tipping point is. I can imagine at some stage the cost would be very off-putting for the householder. But
yes, exactly. I mean, Chris and Anne Bennett are asking about how much funding is requested from private landlords. So I guess that will vary, won't it, according to how it's financed. Yeah.
It varies according to the scheme. So, for example, the local authority Green Deal Delivery Scheme, which is part funding some of the projects, including a couple of those that I spoke about. The grant from that is capped at £5,000, and sort of under that, the landlord has to pay a third. So generally, when we get sort of funding from outside sources, certainly central government, there do tend to be sort of restrictions as to how much we're allowed to offer private landlords. For Green Homes Grant, that's also for council landlords as well, so social landlords.
Claude, Steve, anything you want to ask Rob?
Well, there's two issues. As an architect, I know that it's sometimes extremely difficult to retrieve construction details with no access to building control, or drawings that have been packed in a box somewhere that nobody remembers. So you must be learning a lot every time that you do a new job. Would you be able to make this kind of information accessible?
I must admit, off the top of my head, I don't know how far we've gone with that, but it's certainly something I could look into and sort of find out whether there's any scope for that. I know we have an open sort of data mill sort of in Leeds with an open policy of making such things informational available more generally. If you can leave that with me, I'll have a look into it.
But certainly,
yes, off the top of my head.
Yeah, you can certainly imagine some of these properties in Holbeck. They were built at a time when the sort of detailed drawings probably just don't exist anymore, and so it is about exploring them and actually seeing how they're built and what the particular issues are before you start to do the work. Whereas more modern buildings, you probably have a degree of certainty about what the structure of the building is and how it works, and so you or at least more certainty anyway. Put it that way.
Well, I think you would be surprised actually, because the as someone last week, Özlem, was saying about post-war offices, they're all built in different ways. It was a very experimental era. And I'm not even going anywhere near here the experimental constructions themselves, which are sometimes quite shocking, but seem to work. So all this is experience that could be shared if it were possible. Yeah. So.
I mean, certainly for things like the tower blocks, there are particular sort of types of build and archetypes that we tend to use when we're sort of designing projects, essentially. As you say, with the older sort of terraced properties, it is a bit more difficult. I'll sort of find out, see if there's much scope for sharing that.
Getting a couple of more questions in. So we've been asked, so again, it's the same question about private landlords. How many of them sort of push back, in terms of, actually saying, well, we're not prepared to go with this. How much buy-in is there? Is it quite a good level of buy-in, or do you, or is there an issue there?
I think it depends on the project, really. I mean, sort of, I think for the Holtdales, of the properties where it was offered to, the vast majority of sort of private residents have sort of jumped on it. I think because it's a slightly higher income area than some of them, and there's more owner occupiers as well. The sort of private side of things has been more popular generally. I think there's a bit of carrot and stick as well involved with landlords, because obviously there are sort of the regulations sort of coming into place as to whether they're allowed to rent out, depending on the energy sort of efficiency side. So if you take that together with an offer, together with the sort of threat of enforcement of sort of hazards, cold hazards and things of that sort, I think sort of some of my colleagues on the private sector housing team would be better to sort of talk in a bit more detail about that sort of mixture of sort of carrot and stick. But I think that it's basically a mixture of that.
Sure. Final thing, and I think I know the answer to this, the Holbeck scheme, the external wall insulation was fitted from the outside of the property. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, because Samuel's saying it, the character of the building seemed to have been retained. So I think it's been nicely done, hasn't it? Actually.
Yes, I mean that was one of the. I can remember sort of when the sort of the EWI schemes on the Victorian properties were sort of first being sort of mooted. There was sort of interest from planning that we retain the character, and you can get the sort of different finishes to the EWI, which sort of mimic the different types of brickwork that you have to an extent. So there has been that effort to try and sort of retain that visual character of them.
Thanks, Rob. Great. We'd better move on because we've got about half an hour to go. And Jonathan, welcome. You're next. So I'll let you introduce yourself and move straight on with what you want to say, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So apologies. I was delayed at a previous meeting. It's the way these things go with the internet and all these Zoom meetings and everything. But yeah, my name's Jonathan. I'm one of the co-founders of People Powered Retrofit. And before that, my background, I'm still remain a director at Carbon Co-op. These are community energy organisations, not-for-profit community benefit societies, both of them based in Manchester, termed like community energy organisations. And what I'm going to talk about is about People Powered Retrofit and our work, which is whole house retrofit in the owner-occupier kind of tenure in that kind of area, most of which is happening in Greater Manchester at the moment. We're actually a little bit expanding into West Yorkshire though, so which may be of interest. And yeah, I just wanted to share a little bit about our experiences and a little bit how we've structured our offer, and then yeah, to just initiate any questions that might come up. So yeah, People Powered Retrofit has come out of Carbon Co-op. Carbon Co-op's been going for 10 years now, or 11 years in fact. And People Powered Retrofit is a kind of relatively new social enterprise that we established last year. And really we established it because there is a huge amount of demand at the moment in the owner-occupier space for retrofit services, let's say, at all different levels. And we really struggled to keep up with the capacity at Carbon Co-op, and a lot of our work there was kind of grant funded and episodic and what have you. People Powered Retrofit is very much a social enterprise, a trading social enterprise. So we generate income by charging householders at different points in their kind of retrofit journey as they progress on there. People Powered Retrofit actually to kind of, and our ambition is like a one-stop shop for retrofit. So to kind of fulfill that ambition, we're also involved in other elements here. So software development and support for other organizations wanting to do this sort of thing. Contractor training services, because we all know that there is a real challenge in that kind of area, and then replication and franchise, because there are a lot of other organisations around the UK seeking to do likewise, actually UK and beyond. And yeah, we've got many and different experiences, and yeah, working with people at all kind of different stages of retrofit, from actual works being installed and done to just starting out, and a great deal around the contractor training as well, including some stuff recently been working with Harrogate College. Yeah, bit about the track record. Carbon Co-op, as I said, been going a number of years. We work closely with URBED, urban design practice in Greater Manchester, worker co-op in fact, but who have a particular expertise and skill set in retrofit. And they've been involved in some of the social housing, like the recent Decarbonisation Fund, but also tracking back to things like the TSB, Technology Strategy Board's Retrofit for the Future. So there's a great deal of technical expertise been amassed over the years. And from a Carbon Co-op perspective, our skill and expertise is in engaging people, engaging householders, kind of engendering a sense of collective action and working together, and really learning from that kind of interaction that we have. We did a big scheme back in 2013, which was Community Green Deal. Unfortunately, the Green Deal kind of took that name and some of the not great connotations. Community Green Deal was deep retrofit delivered at scale, so 12 properties together in a single contract, average work costs of £40,000. We're able to offer 0% interest loans as part of that. Yeah, and a huge amount of technical learning there around like whole house and how that works, and very much a fabric first approach as well. And we've developed a similar time over the last 10 years, Home Retrofit Planner, now My Home Energy Planner as was, which is an assessment methodology that we use to assess properties, help people baseline where they're at, give them a set of kind of scenarios that help them understand where that might get them on their retrofit journey. So I thought it'd be interesting to just gain a bit of insight into the households we work with, who tend to be the early adopters, let's call them, who are kind of eager to get their home retrofit and are frustrated because they can't find any options for that at the moment. They're often overwhelmed by complexity and technical detail. Kind of don't know where to start, don't know what to do first. Difficulty making key decisions, and in part because they understand the risks of what might go wrong, and in part because we're talking about not insignificant amounts of investment, you know, that are going into their homes, and they want to make sure that they're doing the right thing. They're often confused by conflicting advice, because retrofit's a relatively small sector, you tend to get these kind of, let's say, retrofit fundamentalists, we might call them, who have a particular point of view that they want to advocate for. And that can be quite confusing for the householder, because they might say, oh, this person says I have to do this, and yet this person says that it has to be passive house, it has to be Enefit or something. Problems finding contractors, as I'm sure everyone's aware, and a real skill shortage there, and problems ensuring high quality works. So, and that's some of the research we've discovered over the years. Kind of responding to that, the service that we've designed as a result of that is, and we gained some BASE support for the design of this process prior to our launch last year, over a 2-year period. So people are interested in a complete retrofit design service with a single point of contact, because they're aware there are all these different kind of skill sets involved, and it's confusing for them. A retrofit advisor, we feel, is key to that, offering basic help and signposting, being the advocate of the householder, the front face of contact, so they're not having to try and deal with all this complexity. An assessment is really important. You know, obviously that's hardwired into quality standards like PAS 2035, like a good quality, high technical detail assessment. A detailed design service as well, and that's often something which is not, I think, recognised within some of the more kind of broad-based procured kind of services, like designs kind of try to squeeze that out. You know, it's a bit complicated, but really householders, especially owner occupiers, really appreciate that kind of bespoke technical detailing. Specialist technical advisors as well, and access to people like structural engineers and such. The procurement of contractors, we ourselves don't contract. We're not a contracting organisation, but we facilitate the procurement process and develop a network of contractors through the training work that we do, and an on-site QA framework as well. Again, working with things like PAS 2035 to offer that standard. This is our consumer journey, our pathway through our service. 5 key areas: advice, assessment, design development, ending in procurement, on-site support, and handover. And you can see the variety of things that you required really to kind of support this kind of service, from architectural support and contractor networks to that training piece as well. And I want to highlight here there are different skill sets involved here. Again, you want to protect the householder from that complexity, but I think it's an important thing. I mean, in skills development and capacity development, to understand that there are different job roles here. You know, assessors and surveyors, architects, engineers, contractors, but also kind of management level service designers, customer experience managers, and product managers as well. And these roles are, you know, are realised within people powered retrofit. And so our work to date, we've worked with 70 householders since our launch last year, all at different stages, very positive feedback. I think the thing we're finding is a lot of demand, more demand than there is capacity. There's a real kind of growth area in the sense of like there's a lot of demand. Obviously, there are capacity issues around those skills in supplying that demand. And the contractor training's been very positive as well. We've worked with a lot of contractors. We were lucky enough to win a skills award. And as I said, the work with Harrogate College, and we've worked with a few other colleges as well. There's a lot of interest from colleges and more formal skills providers in being able to offer contractor training in a way that meets the needs of what you might call RMI sector, refurbishment, maintenance, and improvement. So not necessarily people straight from college and then sort of technical college and into kind of further education. That is there a way to work with people that are already in the business and want to skill up, or even there are people that are looking to change jobs or careers and come into this as well. So I think there's a real interesting piece there around the colleges, and obviously maintaining high quality is a real part of that. And yeah, in terms of the software development and the other organizations that are interested, there's lots and lots of different organizations interested and involved. Only in West Yorkshire yesterday talking to an organization there interested in doing more of this stuff. And there's a lot of interest, I think, on the data side of things in integrating tools and services into things like heat pumps and smart meters. Really kind of a start of a journey around the software side of things. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation, the real whistle-stop tour. But really happy to take questions or engage in debate and discussion.
Thanks, Jonathan. Really interesting. Could I? I think we've got a couple on the Q&A, so I'll pick up on those in a minute. But could I just ask you? You say that there's more demand than supply at the moment. That there's more demand. How would you sort of characterize that demand? You know, what sorts of dwellings, what sorts of income levels, if you like.
Yep.
You know, are you talking about people with lots of money in their pockets? Are you talking about people that want a huge job doing, or people that see a particular issue that they want addressing? Could you just give us a bit of a sense of that?
Absolutely. And I suppose in contextualizing that, I'd say for new technologies and new services, there's often what they call the innovation curve and an uptake curve, where you get like the early adopters and the interested innovators, and then you realize the mass market later. And I think the kind of good analogy is like mobile phones. To begin with, they were huge bricks and cost a fortune. Then they became a bit more user friendly. The technology improved, but also the payment models improved as well over time. And the hardware as well. And suddenly it becomes mass market, and that's not an overnight process. And I think we're at a similar stage here for retrofit. Yeah, we have the early adopters that are super interested and want to do stuff, and ultimately the mass market model will look different, but it may be 5-10 years off, something like that. So the early adopter crowd, the people that are eager and want retrofit done, they tend to have slightly different motivations, I would say. They're more motivated by comfort and climate change and environmental concerns than they are around cost. Not to say cost isn't a factor, and increasingly so, but there are other motivations there. They tend to have more significant budgets, let's say, but they're not like the most wealthy. I think the most wealthy people buy massive houses and don't worry about it. People in the middle tend to be more concerned about improving their homes and putting something back maybe into the community, in a sense. And the average work costs for the people we work with are £40,000 to £50,000, that kind of level. So not astronomical, but not insignificant either. And in terms of they're interested in things like a whole house approach, investing their money wisely, getting good value for money, ensuring technical expertise and quality of works as well. So those are the kind of concerns that drive them.
That's really helpful, thanks. Just got a couple of questions here. There's a question here actually from a guy called Simeon Perry, and he just asks, how are People Powered Retrofit Carbon Co-op linked to the Retrofit Academy? Are you linked, or are you competitors?
Retrofit Academy, so there are retrofit skills providers in this space, and I would say not that many at the moment. And in terms of the skills pathways and the kind of different jobs and competencies we want to realize, there aren't that many providers, and there are accredited schemes here and there, but nothing in between. So we work with Retrofit Academy and engage in schemes and partnerships and what have you, but we also offer skills which aren't things that the Retrofit Academy are doing as well. So we're less competitors and more like building out this space. But yeah, Retrofit Academy, excellent organization. They offer some great courses, but there are other providers out there, and I think increasingly so. I think it's a bit unrealistic to think a single provider could provide for such a massive skills area.
Just a couple of final ones before I bring Steve in to give his final talk. So just sort of, how do the finances work for the Carbon Co-op? How does that actually work for you? And is a cost benefit calculation done for householders in terms of?
Yes, absolutely. For People Powered Retrofit, the service, essentially we charge at different stages. So
Yeah.
we give some advice for free and an initial kind of project brief call. And then as people progress, we're charged at different stages. It's not dissimilar to the way that people work with architects anyway, through the REBA stages, you know. In terms of like that cost benefit analysis, the assessment is essential to that. So the assessment sets a benchmark, or where are people at the moment, and then gives people a costed set of improvements to bring them down, you know, in terms of energy performance. And there's information about the cost of the measures, the benefits of the measures in terms of energy, carbon, and running costs as well. So yeah, they get a full kind of understanding of those kind of things, a set of options that they can then come down to and say, oh, I'll take this forward, I'll take that forward.
I think we better leave it there, Jonathan, because we've got one more to go. But that was really great, and really appreciate what you told us. And I'm sure people will have lots of other questions that they might probably send through afterwards. But I'm going to hand over to Steve now to finish off. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks very much. Okay, I'll share my screen in a minute. Just to introduce myself, I'm Steve Hoey. I'm the CEO of People Powered Homes, which is a subsidiary of Leeds Community Homes, which is a community land trust and also a hub for community-led housing in the West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire regions. So I'm just going to talk quite briefly about some of my thoughts around retrofit, some of the things we've spotted or been involved in, and then talk about one example of an organisation in Leeds called Canopy that's renovating empty homes and doing retrofit. So now I'll share the screen. Let's see, desktop, this one. Okay, can you all see a BBC website there?
Yes.
Great. Okay, it's working. So I was going to start off with this. I spotted this article a month or two ago on the BBC website, and it was talking about the benefits of refurbishment over demolition of buildings. And it's often been assumed in the past that it's a good idea to demolish inefficient buildings and build new ones. But actually, because of all the embodied carbon in those buildings, it's much better idea to refurbish whenever you can. And this is something we've kind of anecdotally known in the sector, I think, for a long time. But it's good to see actually, you know, coming through with some evidence. And this was actually off the back of a parliamentary committee that had started making recommendations that government make policy around this, because there is so much embodied carbon in buildings that it's just a terrible idea to knock them down unless you absolutely have to. So refurbishment is a great idea. Something we were involved in was this, just tangentially in terms of consulting on this and inputting into it, was this national retrofit strategy, which the Construction Leadership Council published in 2021. It's freely available on the internet if you just Google CLC retrofit strategy, and it's really comprehensive. So there's a massive challenge in the UK around retrofitting our housing stock, and one of the challenges is around skills, which is really good to hear Jonathan talking about carbon co-op and people powered retrofit, but also funding, which keeps coming up, and reports like this and other bodies like the National Housing Federation have made estimates of how much it's going to cost to actually retrofit all the housing, and it's pretty astronomical. The cost for social housing alone is over 100 billion. And you know, once you start talking about all the housing, then you can multiply that by a factor of several times. So the government needs to fund a lot more retrofit is the bottom line if they're going to hit their targets around net zero. But having said that, this report puts forward a case for actually investing a lot, but then seeing that investment grow and reap rewards, in that a massive industry would spring up around retrofit. Lots of jobs would be created, lots of social and financial benefit back to the people setting up firms and gaining jobs, also back to the government in terms of tax and so on. And so the argument is put that actually it's a really good idea to invest in this, even though it might feel painful in the beginning. There's actually a big payback financially and socially and environmentally. So that's worth a read if people are interested in this topic. So the government have launched a retrofit programme. There's a £3 billion funding scheme to help retrofit housing. There's £1 billion going towards public buildings, and there's £2 billion being made available to private owners. And how that's coming out is something I'm certainly not an expert on, but it might be something for people to have a look at. And there's a small amount being put out into something called the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. I believe about 3 or 4 billion has come out already in that. There's been 2 rounds so far. And you can find more information about the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. But so far, if say 4 billion has come out, there's still another 96 billion at least that's required to bring all the social housing up to scratch in the UK, which is quite scary and big number. It was great to hear about Carbon Co-op and People Powered Retrofit. Another example of a cooperative working in the London area is this one, Retrofit Works, which has a similar model in some respects. Maybe Jonathan could comment on that if there's time. But again, that's another community-led, community-based approach to helping people renovate, retrofit, improve their homes and improve the environmental performance. So I thought I'd just flag that up. Another scheme I'm aware of is the Confederation of Cooperative Housing. They're a membership body for co-ops, housing co-ops in England and Wales, I think. They've launched their own retrofit service, which is interesting. I'm not sure how much they've actually practically done yet, but they're offering a service to housing co-ops around the country. I'd be interested to find out more about this one. I'm just showing you guys because I'm aware of it. I'm not sure who would actually do the work. For example, in Leeds, if a housing co-op wanted a retrofit doing, I'm not sure who would then be found to do that work. That would be a really interesting conversation to have. Next, I was just going to talk about Canopy Housing, where I used to work actually, so I know it quite well. And it's a great example of a community-led group, not for profit, doing up empty homes and retrofitting everyone as they renovate them. Here you can see a picture of that's Patrick on the right, used to work with him, and a volunteer on the left who I don't know, putting in some insulation into a property. That one to me looks like it might be sheep's wool. We certainly used a lot of different systems when we were working on the properties, including sheep's wool. Kingspan was used sometimes. Here we can see them using Kingspan here in the background. The basic model of Canopy is that they've been going about 20 years now, and they get hold of long-term empty properties, quite often by leasing them from Leeds City Council on a favourable lease, or from housing associations, and more recently, in about the last 10 years, they've been buying a lot of properties when they've been able to get grants and then borrow against the assets that they've got together to buy more. So now they're up to about 70 properties, I think, which are all long-term empty properties in Leeds, which they've acquired and then renovated. And the way they do it is they include and involve local volunteers into the teams that go into the properties. So here you can see some of the volunteers, and they always work with a member of staff or more than one on a property. So the local volunteers are learning skills, and quite a lot of them go on to work in the construction industry after volunteering on Canopy sites. Another fairly unique aspect to the way they work is that they house homeless people, but the homeless households get involved in renovating their own future homes. So there's a load of social benefits there around feeling ownership, learning skills, getting to know your neighbours, and so on, and putting your own personal stamp on your property before you move in. Here you can see another picture of them insulating a roof. And here's a very mucky team. They've probably been demolishing, I'm guessing. That's the kind of muck you get when you're pulling ceilings down, that sort of thing, of these really old Victorian terrace houses. They used to stuff the cavities full of coal dust to help insulate them. This was sort of 150-year-old logic. So you have to get all that down before you can put good stuff up there. And they do a lot of stuff in the community as well. So this is outside their Hare Hills office, just having a picnic, inviting the neighbours along to chat and have a drink. And so there's a lot of benefits to this approach anyway. And obviously they're pretty small scale, but there are about 100 organisations around the country that have this self-help housing approach to doing up empty homes. And they're steadily growing. I think there's potential for a lot more of this to happen. There's another organisation in Leeds called Latch that's very similar, and there has been other empty homes work. And there's some great examples around the region. In Hull there's Gyroscope, and over in Liverpool there's Granby 4 Street, and there's loads. But so it's encouraging. But in the community-led housing sector, we're constantly lobbying government to support more of this kind of work, as well as new build as well. But yeah, I'm happy that I've got a chance to share that. I'll just stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to finish there. If anyone's got any questions about any of that, I'm very happy to try and answer them.
Yeah, Martin.
Sorry, Claude, go on, chip in.
No, I was checking that you were here.
I am. I was just a bit slow on the trigger there. Sorry about that. I mean, someone put something in the chat there about the sort of government funding available, and I thought that was quite an interesting observation actually, because the SHDF Wave 2 is £800 million, which is the same amount as the Decent Homes money for Leeds only. And that's a national scheme. So it does feel like an absolute drop in the ocean.
Yeah.
It's just a comment, really. I mean, it feels like there needs to be far more investment to sort of, get things moving. It's probably a comment rather than anything. Jonathan, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Steve. It's a really, really interesting presentation, and the work of Canopy and Latch is just really great, I think. And but one of the things that I've always found curious, and I just wondered whether you had any views on it, was like why this isn't more widely spread, and quite often we've worked with quite a few people who've come to us and say, I'm really interested in refurbishing empty homes, and it's never quite taken off. And I don't know whether it's because the housing market is so overinflated, it's very hard to compete, and maybe there's a lack of empty homes, I don't know, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on
it. Yeah, well, I mean, there are difficulties in getting hold of empty homes. Some of them are the most difficult empty homes in Leeds are usually privately owned, and it can be really hard finding the owner for a start and then working with them. I mean, there's a service in Leeds that I'm quite familiar with called the Empty Homes Doctor, and that's exactly what they do. They work with those owners of those difficult properties to get them back into use, which is great. And they often work in partnership with Latch and Canopy and others. I think the biggest barrier to community-led housing organisations in general, and organisations like Canopy and Latch, is money. It's just funding. If they had more money, they could buy more houses. It's really as simple as that. I mean, access to land is a challenge as well for people trying to do new build, but at the end of the day, if you've got enough money, then you can buy the land. So these kind of schemes just need better resourcing, really. I mean, the government has got an affordable homes program that comes out through Homes England, which has got about 8 billion in the pot at the moment, I think. And groups like this Some of them are choosing to register as registered providers so that they can access that kind of funding, but others are not for various reasons. So there's various bureaucratic barriers in the way as well, because even once you go through the pain of registering as an RP, you've then got all the bureaucracy of reporting and so on. And then the grant rate might be 40% of your costs, depending on the scheme, and then you've still got to find the other 60%, so you can be borrowing or scratching around for other grants and so on. You know, if the government wanted to fund this stuff better, they could make the grant rate 60%. They could make it easier for smaller groups to register. But there have been bespoke funding schemes in the past, like the Empty Homes Community Grant Programme was really successful. That was probably between 15 and 10 years ago. That was a £50 million programme. You know, in Leeds alone, we used 4 million to renovate, I think it was 42 empty homes, which was a great programme, and we could have done that 5 times over if the money had kept coming through, but it didn't. It was a limited scheme, about 2 years long, and then it stopped. We need long-term funding solutions to these kinds of issues. It's the same with the Community Housing Fund in the community-led housing sector in general. It was originally a £300 million programme. That shrank down to about 160 million. It came in fits and starts. It was short term. People didn't get enough time to spend the capital. And now it's finished. And if it was a rolling programme over 10, 20 years, that'd be fantastic. And people could do these, many more of these kinds of projects.
Does Canopy own the homes? Jeff asks, Steve.
So Canopy probably owns about half of the homes now, and the other half is are on leases with Leeds City Council or housing associations. The council just recently extended all of the leases to 99 years at a peppercorn rent of £1 a year. Yeah. So that's a great example of brilliant partnership working with Leeds City Council. Leeds is actually a great local authority area to be working and doing this kind of work. We're often the envy of the rest of the country in terms of the support we get from the council. I should say that.
That's really
I have a question for, I don't know if Jonathan is still there, for Steve and Jonathan, particularly in the context of Leeds City Council, who have the huge advantage of being able to do very large programmes. I mean, obviously, the disadvantage is also getting large budgets for it. But it does seem to me that developers a lot of the time will prefer a bigger job to a smaller job. And I wondered whether there are any schemes across the country where a whole street, say, might have teamed up together to get one contractor to move from one house to another, develop the expertise for it, and for everybody to share the costs. Or is this just too complicated?
I mean, can I just come in before you answer that? I mean, it happens on a very small scale, doesn't it, all the time? So on my street, you know, a pair of semi-detached houses have had, both sides have had their roof done at the same time. You know, so I think your next door neighbour who you know, you might say, we're having our roof done or whatever, you know, what do you think? It might be a bit cheaper if we do it in one go. But coordinating across a whole street is probably more tricky.
Well, there's a legacy here that we kind of, to an extent, forgotten, which are area-based schemes, where, especially early years of the 2000s, where there was more money around, definitely, but you would get housing providers doing roof upgrades for a set of streets, and there was even some funding there from energy companies. And if there were owner-occupiers that lived in that street, council would be able to assist them through group works, loan schemes, to enable them to participate in the schemes. And we're actually piloting a scheme now, bringing that back again, but for retrofit in Manchester here, where we'll be able to offer a relatively small set of upgrades, but a package, not just like solar PV panels, but like a retrofit package, and say, people in this area, if you're interested, come into this scheme. We've got the benefit there of having some grant funding, plus the local authority are then kind of remembering those kind of schemes and are doing group works lending against them as well. They're slightly more common in Scotland, but mostly limited exclusively to social housing. But I think there's a huge potential there to benefit kind of different tenures all in the same kind of area through a single scheme. Whether it's cheaper or not is for debate. I think it might be that the scheme is more widely taken up rather, you know, but you can then do things like contract management and on quality and that sort of thing. I don't know, Steve might know as well.
We're 2 now, so
Yes.
I'm conscious that we've overrun. I think we're probably better to draw things to a close, if that's okay. So look, thank you very much for joining us today. Really appreciated. I found this fascinating, and I know when we upload it on the YouTube channel, we'll have a lot of viewers, as we always do, who I think will find it fascinating as well. So I'm speaking to you as well, not just the people who joined us today live, but those who will be joining us later on. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Just to say that next week, same time, same place, Innovative Briefs and Initiatives, that's the title of the next one. We've got people coming from the Architectural Heritage Fund. We've got someone from Morgan Sindall talking about a very interesting conversion of a Leeds city centre office block into a school, and then we've got someone from Situ, Jonathan Wilson, joining us from Situ, about their interesting scheme on the riverside, and then an architect, Dave Podgson from Group Ginger, talking about innovative briefs. So lots to look forward to for next week. We've got 3 more of these webinars to come, but thanks all for joining us today, and have a good afternoon, and see you all soon.